Welcome to OAG's latest webinar. My name's Deirdre Fulton. I'm a partner at Midas Aviation and I'm delighted to be back hosting the webinar today. So our theme today is sunshine ahead. So does the summer schedule point to good news? Now, we've been tracking the recovery in the industry for many months now, too many months probably to mention. And as we move into the summer schedule in a couple of weeks' time, what can we expect to see from airlines? Is it all good news ahead? Is it what everybody's been hoping for, the much fated recovery? And what other factors are in play at the minute that might mean the summer is just not quite what some of us are hoping for? So we're going to be exploring all of that today. We're going to be looking at some travel hotspots. We're going to be looking at how airlines are responding and what's happening in terms of some market share battles in some key markets. And we're going to focus a little bit more on Asia Pacific. And we're running another webinar later today, which will look more at Europe and North America. And you're welcome to register for that if you're interested in that too. We'll also take questions and answers throughout, so please don't hesitate to let us know if there's something you'd like to put to the panel. And let's now introduce our panel. Welcome, John, as ever, OAG's Chief Analyst. You're here today to share your insights and thoughts on what's happening in the industry.
Yeah, hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be with you. Nearly the summer season. That has to be good news.
Well, the days are getting longer in the Northern Hemisphere, so that's something at least to cheer us up a little. And I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Cheng Lai. Welcome back, Cheng. You've been a fairly regular participant in our webinars. Not been on for a while, so we're really looking forward to having you back and hearing your insights.
Hi, Deirdre. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
I think you were also in China, weren't you, Cheng, when the news came through that the country was going to be reopening for travel. So we're really looking forward to hearing some insights from you on that.
Yes, exactly. I was in China for about 2.5 months. Yeah, at the end of last year and early this year. So I was there to experience a strict lockdown and then the sudden reopening up of the market.
Yeah, wow. So really, your experience your insights around that experience will be quite fascinating, I imagine. I think it's the question that people in the industry are still asking, isn't it? That how is this recovery going to play back? And of course, this week, China announced that inbound visas for foreign travellers will resume. So I think there was a tremendous sense, certainly in other parts of the world, that this meant a grand reopening. And I think we knew, didn't we, quite quickly afterwards that this was going to be a much more steady, phased recovery. It's still seeming that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although I imagine there's huge pent-up demand in China for travel too.
Yeah.
So we'll get into some of that as we go. Okay, let's take a look at our usual slides that we always cover at the start. So we've got a few pictures here. The global one. We're getting close to 2019 levels, aren't we? So this week, I think just 6% behind the 2019 figure, and certainly we're dramatically better than 2022, aren't we, John?
Yeah, we're nearly there. It's been a long journey to get here, but we are nearly there. There are some interesting sort of things, as always, behind the data, Deirdre, and capacity is but just one measurement. And I think one of the interesting things we've seen through the rebuild has been actual frequency. Number of flights per week has lagged behind capacity, as we've seen airlines using slightly larger aircraft types, with more capacity per movement, for a whole host of reasons, not least of which is, fleet rationalization that took place at the beginning of the pandemic, shortages of pilots, which has a greater impact on the smaller regional aircraft types and the larger narrow-bodied and wide-bodied aircraft. So yeah, that's all driving it. But in terms of actual capacity, even allowing for the fact we will see some slight shakedown in April, May, and June, inevitably, as we do, we're getting ever closer, and that's great news. And once we've reached it, what next? Where do we go from here? Lots of interesting things happening in parts of the world with new airlines and ambitious objectives in the coming years. Domestic capacity is actually ahead of 2019 at this moment in time. Markets such as the United States, where we've seen rapid acceleration of low-cost and ultra-low-cost capacity from Spirit and Frontier, Allegiant, and JetBlue, who are a bit more of a hybrid, has driven the US situation. And of course, China, as Cheng can talk to later, has been very strong in the domestic market throughout the pandemic. And the international continues to rebuild. And one of the great things about having Cheng here today is we can discuss how China International is going to rebuild, because that has a long way to go, and a very large proportion of that gap we still see is either directly or indirectly through China's capacity and its reliance on other surrounding markets in Southeast Asia. So yeah, it's broadly a good news story. We're heading in the right direction, and I think as long as we keep capacity discipline in place through the summer and perhaps into next winter, things are looking pretty good for the industry in terms of at least capacity, and demand seems strong as well.
All sounds very, very positive. I think it's quite interesting, and we'll come on to this when we look at the next slide on the regions. I was just taking a look at China, Northeast Asia specifically, which on this chart would be wrapped up in the orange line here. But Northeast Asia itself is still 55% below 2019 levels internationally, and China, of course, is a big contributor to that figure, isn't it? And China only has currently 25% of its international capacity from 2019 operating. So for context, 450,000 seats in a week versus what was 1.9 million. So there's still a long way to go, isn't there, in terms of that?
Absolutely.
Back?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at China, the China-Japan market, there's still only 4 Japanese cities with direct services from China, and that used to be, I think it was somewhere around 11 or 12. So there's quite a gap there that's yet to be filled. You got Hong Kong, where capacity's come back quite strongly, but still it's got a huge journey to recover. And then there is that whole sort of golden triangle of China, South Korea, and Japan, which, Cheng, I think for Chinese airlines is probably some of their most lucrative international flying, isn't it, to South Korea and Japan?
Yes, John. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the routes from China to Japan, China to South Korea are the most profitable routes for Chinese airlines. Up to now, the recovery has been pretty slow. But just look at the schedule for the summer season, the airlines are doubling their capacity to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But
of course, what we were seeing pre-COVID was Thailand was obviously a massively important outbound market for Chinese travelers, but there was a shift going on towards Japan, and Japan had become the fastest growing outbound market, hadn't it? So I'm guessing there's still a huge amount of pent up demand for people who were poised to travel perhaps in 2020 and now are still keen to go and explore and take in Japan.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Even before COVID, Japan was one of them most favorite tourist destinations for Chinese travelers. Yeah, and now I think yeah, it's become, you know, as what you said, the pent-up demand. And I think also airlines have a strong incentives to open up routes to Japan.
Mhm.
Mm.
Okay. And do you have a sense, Cheng, that obviously we had, you know, at the same time as we were seeing strong growth into countries like Japan and sustained growth into Thailand, Chinese carriers had quite extensive networks to North America and to Europe. But we know that these markets were challenging for them in terms of profitability. Are we going to see, and you know, I'm sure there are tourist bodies and you know, visitor bureaus across the world that are anticipating the return of the Chinese traveller. Are we going to see the same enthusiasm and appetite by airlines to come back into all of these markets, or do you think this is going to be a slow and steady recovery?
Yeah, Deidre, I think it's going to be slow and steady recovery. Possibly it would take Chinese airlines quite a long time to get to the 2019 level. For a couple of reasons. Say when you look at China, basically, you know, China North America and also China Europe market before COVID, you know, the Chinese airlines actually had quite a lot of support from regional governments, and now, you know, that becomes the issue for them because of financial situations faced by the government. And also there's some I think yeah, some geopolitical reasons, particularly Europe. There's Russia-Ukraine war. I think although Chinese airlines can fly over the Russian airspace, I'm not sure how the European counterparts react. But if they work together, it could be possibly a win-win solution. But that's something remains to be seen. And
Yeah,
when you look at China, yeah, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chen, I think this is, you know, the market between China to Europe and China to North America is, you know, probably going to take a step backwards by about 5 or 7 years. For European carriers, it's extremely difficult for the reasons you mentioned, extended sector lengths. The market is still quite small and fragile. Confidence needs to be restored. And it does make sense for the Chinese carriers who can still use or take advantage of the Great Circle route over Russian airspace, and have a lower cost base generally than the European carriers, to purely feed their alliance member hubs in Frankfurt, Amsterdam Schiphol, London Heathrow, wherever it happens to be, rather than the European carriers putting back in as much frequency. I mean, I know Lufthansa and Finnair and some others have already put stuff back, and British Airways are going to come back into Beijing and Shanghai. So I know that that's coming back, but it's the dynamics and the playing field between Europe and China has got a lot more heavy than it was maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah. I think if Chinese airlines, the European airlines form sort of joint venture, share the revenue, maybe that'd be a way out solution. But I don't know. You know, it's such a, you know, it's much easier said than done, and maybe a lot of
parties have got to want to play, haven't they? In that kind of context.
Absolutely. You know, if you are a Chinese airline and you've lost millions of dollars of revenue, and you suddenly have an opportunity of making some profitability on some long haul international routes, are you really to share that with your quote partners at this stage of your recovery?
That's right. You know, you may have heard the news. I think a couple of weeks ago, a U.S. a congressman proposed for Chinese airlines, they're not allowed to fly over Russian airspace to North America because it's not fair to American carriers.
And Willie Walsh has made similar noises about up through Russian airspace to Europe. and you know, the unfair advantage it provides. You know what? Ultimately, that's life, and however fair or unfair, we've all seen these situations before, and there's someone who wins and someone who loses. Just
Yeah.
move on.
That's right. And also when you look at China North American market, it's quite interesting. During COVID period, you know, because of the so-called 5-1 policy implemented by Chinese regulators, so, you know, the bilateral flights, you know, between China and North America, it's, I think, less than the 5% level. And then now Chinese flights are keen to increase frequency. By American carriers, they're not. They're quite happy with the current status quo.
Well,
So
this goes back a long way, doesn't it? The bilateral between China and the United States, where at one point, you know, the Chinese and in that spirit of, you know, global cooperation, received an expansion to the air service agreement with the US, and then have subsequently reapplied for more capacity and more designation. And of course, the US only has 3 airlines who are really interested in flying to China. And quite frankly, they don't want to fly any more than they are. So, you know, the air service agreement is essentially blocked. It's not going to grow. It's frustrated. And at the same time, of course, China was getting open skies with Europe and virtual open skies with the United Kingdom. There's still a lot of politics in air services. There's no doubt about that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
We've just had a question, Cheng, about what is the, did you say fly one or 5-1 policy?
5-1.
Yeah, 5-1. Okay, 5-1. Okay, that means, okay, if I remember correctly, that every Chinese airline can only fly to one country and one flight a week. Yeah, so for each country, they can only fly one destination and operate one flight a week. Yes, I got your 5-1 policy.
This was at the beginning of the pandemic, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cheng. They also had a limit on load factor that they could sell to ensure spacing on the aircraft as well.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Then the policy later on changed, but it's largely within the framework of 5-1. On some routes, they may relax to allow two flights a week, or some places they may add so like 2 destinations in the country. But it's just around that 5-1 policy that lasts for around 3 years during for the 3-year COVID period. Now China has now completely abolished the so-called 5-1 policy, but but it still faces quite a lot of challenges when increasing flights on the international market. As John mentioned, they're subject to bilateral agreements. If your other party, you know, doesn't want to increase, and then you got some issues, and also it may be difficult to secure slots at some major airports.
Which was an issue or has been an issue from the US airlines, a perception that they couldn't or would not be allowed the right slots they needed to operate in Shanghai. Pre-pandemic.
So still some constraints on growth then.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of other parts of the world, John, obviously Latin America has been strong and looks to continue to be strong through the summer.
Yeah, well, it will be. Colombia, for instance, and Mexico have done really well. You know, there's been a semi-airline failure in Colombia in the last 4 weeks, but it will, you know, it will still be a strong market, particularly for the US inbound into Latin America. That's going very strongly at the moment. I think the fascinating one, though, Deirdre, and we'll come on to it later, is the Middle East, because that is going to be a real action zone in the coming months for capacity growth, new airlines, complete shake-up of the regional market. You know, Saudi 2030 vision, everything's going to change there.
And I'm not sure that this dotted line really fully reflects what will happen if you follow the trajectory of the Middle East line there. It's you know, it's a bit mixed. Of course, you know, this forward-looking data is what is planned, and we know that there still is fluidity, I think is fair to say, in the forward-looking schedule. much more so perhaps than we would have seen in 2019 in terms of that, you know, that short term 1, 2, 3 months, 3 months out picture. No, I think the variation is less than it was, but there still is fluctuation, isn't there? Scope for fluctuation, both in both directions, up and down.
Absolutely.
So interesting. We just we heard a little snippet there in the questions about there is some relaxation allowed between Europe and China. So Amsterdam are going to have 3 Chinese airlines serving 4 destinations this summer, and 1 Dutch airline serving 2 destinations. So yeah, it's noted that we're not quite back to 2019 levels, but certainly a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and you know, we know that group travel out of China is now allowed again, and that's obviously a positive sign. So we just you know, keep our
Although
fingers.
there's a change in that dynamic, isn't there, Cheng? I think the days of group travel being this kind of predominant way that Chinese outbound travellers take holidays has shifted, hasn't it? We're seeing much more independent travel now, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Even before COVID, the majority travelers were independent travelers.
Okay,
yeah.
Interesting. All right, let's take a look then at the summer schedule specifically. So it looks very optimistic, just 0.3% seats less this summer than summer 19. We can obviously see there's a very strong domestic position, and that's partly what we were talking about earlier in terms of China, North America, USA, Brazil. All of these big domestic markets are, you know, at recovery or beyond in some cases. And international, we're seeing an uplift from, at the moment, international is tracking about 15% below 2019, but we're seeing an improvement in that position too. So it all looks positive, doesn't it?
It does. I think we need to, you know, not to put any sort of dampeners on the summer. I think we need to recognise that when we're looking at the whole summer, we're looking as far out as October, and there will be airlines who will be adjusting schedules. And we've also got to recognise that the schedules airlines having at the moment reflect what they hope to operate, given all available resources and planned resources that will be coming into their businesses and through their suppliers. And whilst I don't expect we will have any of the last minute hysteria we had last year about not enough staff and resources, I wouldn't be surprised to see some airlines shaving capacity because at an earlier stage, because they realise they're not going to have enough pilots or duty hours or indeed even aircraft to operate some of their programs. I mean, there's a lot of third-party lessors who are placing aircraft with legacy carriers at the moment, and indeed scheduled airlines in Europe moving their own aircraft to some of their partners and even competitors because they don't have the resources themselves to operate them. So
it's a valid point, isn't it? And actually, I think we're going to come on and talk about resources later on. But let's crack on so we can get back to that conversation. At country level, then we've talked a little bit just about this. There's different things going on, aren't there? So as we said, there's very strong growth. So we're looking here at just how capacity has evolved over a representative sample of the biggest country markets over the last few years. US, China, as we said, strong. India, of course, you know, strong recovery there. Spain doing well too. Brazil, as I mentioned, there are some markets where there's a slightly different picture. Japan, which I think is quite interesting, I guess, held back to some extent by what we were saying about China not quite being there yet, and Germany is also seeing capacity reduced this summer, and that's back to the resources point, isn't it? About the situation that Lufthansa's in terms of.
Certainly, Lufthansa's situation is challenging, and you know they are the slowest of the European majors to recover, and you know they will argue that they've been careful in their rebuild and that they're profitable, and things are heading in the right direction, but it's been slower than expected. They've migrated some capacity to Eurowings as well, but you know the German market is lacking because there's less domestic capacity at the moment as well. Some of the low-cost airlines have decided it's not really a market they want to be in. Government's encouraging other forms of modal transport within Germany, so that doesn't help. Their situation is similar in France as well, although they're not on this list. And in Japan, it is purely the lack of Chinese connectivity and access to China at the moment, which is
that's hampering that recovery.
It's more about Chinese carriers. The actual Japanese airlines, yes, they do fly to China, of course, but they fly to the major markets. They don't fly to those, you know, what we term as tier 2 airports that have a population and catchment area of 12 million, which is a bit tongue in cheek because that's all of Heathrow and Gatwick's combined catchment area. But they don't fly to those destinations, and it's the Chinese airlines who operate those flights. So that's why they're missing out. And India is just India. It's on a trajectory of growth.
On a growth trajectory, isn't it? Yeah.
It'll continue.
Okay. Let's bring a little bit of sunshine in now. So we thought it would be interesting just to take a look at thinking about summer, thinking about travel and sentiment about travel. TripAdvisor published at the beginning of the year their top most popular destinations worldwide, and the top 10, and then also the top 10 trending destinations. So we thought we'd just have a take a look and see whether capacity matched up, capacity growth matched up with that, and largely it does, which I suppose confirms perhaps the validity of the popularity of the destinations. But yeah, some interesting things here that I think when you unpick what is going on, there's a lot of bucket list travel, isn't there? There's a lot of, in the same way that we're seeing people, there was the immediate rush to return to take the holidays that were planned that got postponed. But I think now we're seeing that people are choosing to travel to those destinations that have always been on their wish list, because why not?
Well, I think partly that, certainly in the case of Bali, that's true. Although I heard a story yesterday that the tourism authority in Bali has now banned tourists from hiring motorbikes and driving around without any without any tops on and things like that to try and improve the image. You look at Dubai, the second largest source market now for Dubai is apparently Russia, and that was transformed this time last year when the Ukraine situation developed and lots of Russians left their homelands and moved into Dubai, particularly those that were able to afford to. And the rest of that list is pretty sort of iconic, isn't it? London, Rome, Paris, that's the European tour. And a lot of that, I suspect, will be driven by the strength of the dollar versus both the pound and the euro, which makes Europe and the United Kingdom extremely affordable at this moment in time. Istanbul's becoming it's a tourist destination in its own right. They've done a really good job, both as an airport or airports, and also in building the awareness of the destination and, you know, trading on the bridge between Europe and Asia, and all that offers. And this list on the right hand side is, as you say, those sort of places that are beginning to be more and more intriguing and interesting to people.
Yeah.
Jiang,
Thank
in
you.
terms of in terms of the aspirations of Chinese travellers, do you have a sense that people's desire to travel to places is changing? Obviously, Japan, we talked about was of interest before, and it still is. And we've sort of speculated throughout COVID that will people want to travel to places that feel safe or that are known? I think what's going to be interesting to understand is to what extent people are planning trips to the bucket list type destinations or places that are further afield.
Yeah. Deja, I think for Chinese travelers, possibly their top 2 destinations, I would think majority of them possibly will be in the Southeast Asia or like Northeast Asia, particularly like Thailand, and also Indonesia, Bali, or that be quite popular with the Chinese tourists. Of course, Japan and South Korea. Yeah, for this, there's still a significant Chinese traveling long haul to Europe and North America. But because of capacity constraints from Chinese and also international airlines, there may be issue for them to return to their 2019 level, as we previously discussed. Yeah. And just to add to Joe's point about those top 10 destinations listed here, I think those hub carriers may play an important role in driving up the traffic. For example, Dubai, they got Emirates, which is very strong, and also Istanbul, you have got Turkish Airlines. Yeah, they are recovering quite well, bringing lots of traffic to their major hubs. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we don't see it on this list here, Deirdre, and it is the smallest regional market in the world, but Central Asia is booming at this moment in time in terms of economic development, increased capacity from airlines. So Turkish Airlines, to Cheng's point, have invested millions of dollars in new routes to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and other places in Central Asia. And you have the unfortunate flow of traffic that's been going back and forth to Russia and continues to go back and forth. And some of it has undoubtedly been one way out of Russia. And you've also got this huge growth in Muslim tourism, and that is creating a real hotspot with people wanting to go on trips to Central Asia, visit various Muslim relics and historical locations. So although it's not as big as Chiang Mai or any of those points, those markets are growing, and I think in the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to see a lot of low-cost activity begin to occur in those parts of the world.
Definitely ones to watch. I think absolutely. On the subject of low cost, that takes us nicely to our next slide, where we've taken a look at the top 20 airlines for this summer versus 2019. Now, there are some sort of key things to draw from this, I guess. Looking at the whole pool of airlines, we've got quite considerably less, still a lot, 688 airlines this summer, with scheduled flights versus 763 in summer 19. But the kind of key thing really that we observed from looking at this is low-cost carriers have really pushed up their position in the global capacity rankings. And that partly, I guess, has just, the fact that nobody could travel long haul essentially played in their favour, didn't it? But they've sort of cemented that position, I guess, now and are pushing beyond that. We've got Ryanair going up from 5th to 3rd, Wizz Air going from 32nd place to 16th, and Spirit doing a sort of similar trajectory. And I think that what's going to be interesting is that, yes, we've talked about China still to reopen properly in terms of capacity and frequency from North America, Europe and other parts of the world. that's not really going to change this position, is it?
No, no. Well, what it will do is see a segmental shift from domestic to international, and it may actually see slightly less capacity because those international sectors may be longer in duration, although Cheng has got some interesting data to share with us about aircraft utilization in China, so that might not be an issue. But I think, you know, this plays to the whole thing about low-cost carriers were much quicker to get back into the market. They were able to stimulate demand quickly, and it's also about timing and good fortune. And some of those low-cost carriers, such as Spirit, Frontier, and Allegiant in the US, happen to have aircraft deliveries scheduled just as the pandemic was easing. Right place, right time. You know, take advantage of it. They're not going to catch American. And indeed, I think the merger, if it does get approved, and it may not, of JetBlue and Spirit, you know, takes them from respective positions in the US market of 5th and 6th to a combined position of 5th. It doesn't actually move the needle very far in competitive terms versus the other carriers. And you know, it's interesting. The Lufthansa's, as you see, Air Canada's pulled out of the top 20. They're not in the FTSE 100 or its equivalent. And you look at EasyJet, who appear consciously not to have put capacity back as quickly, but focused on profitability. Different airlines, different strategies in their recoveries. It's been a fascinating time to observe and see what's going on.
I think what carry on, Cheng.
Yeah, John, to add to your points, I think low-cost carriers are being pretty good at make good use of every crisis. We look at September 11th and also 2008 financial crisis. You know, low-cost carriers always, you know, had sort of like a faster expansion, and they had faster recovery than full-service airlines. And now, you know, at the moment, you know, many countries are facing some economic issues. So you know, people still want to travel, but previously, say they travel long haul, now they travel short haul. And so low-cost carriers, you know, may become the preferred airlines.
Yeah, let's not forget, no one likes a crisis more than Michael O'Leary.
And you know, look at the scale of capacity increases. Frequency increases here on. No, sorry, it is capacity and frequency, isn't it? Capacity, and then we've got flights per week in summer 23. But you know, the percentage increases that we're seeing across Ryanair's network are quite incredible, actually, aren't they?
Yeah, they're staggering, and you know, when you get to this size, you can't help but succeed, and they just grow and grow and grow exponentially, and they've made big announcements about additional flights at Dublin this summer, where the second runway is a much needed asset. Obviously, big expansion in Palma, playing on that leisure market. So yeah, they are of a size and scale, Deirdre, that, you know, they're just every time they take a step, it's 2 steps forward against their competitors. They're just painting the whole of Europe in Ryanair Tailfins.
I think what's interesting is that it sends a signal, doesn't it, that they are optimistic about the summer in terms of demand. You know, in a context when in their home market across Europe, there are cost of living crises, you know, there are labour disputes. So it's really interesting that that position will still travel. They'll maybe just do it.
Not be optimistic. You know, they are the masters of low cost travel. They have the lowest cost per unit in Europe. They have the ability to stimulate markets. You know, they've got all of the. If you had a list of all the things you wanted to be successful this summer, then they would tick every one of those. They've got more than enough resources. They're primed. They're driving high aircraft utilization where others aren't. Their ancillary revenues are going through the roof at the moment. You know, it's they've got the perfect model for this summer, and they'll deliver outstanding results. I have no doubt.
Yeah, another point is that I think most countries follow quite similar pattern of recovery. First, the domestic market, then short-haul international, then the long-haul international. So low-cost carrier particularly focus on domestic and short-haul international. So these are the two markets which recovered much faster than long-haul international.
Yeah. And we're seeing that that sort of manifests itself actually when we look at just Europe and how low-cost carriers have taken share versus legacy carriers. I think in all of these markets, with the exception of Germany, we've seen the share operated by low-cost carriers increase by, if not 10%, then actually in some cases closer to 15%. And that's here to stay, isn't it? You know, that's not something that's going to change anytime soon.
And you know, the reason we've shown by both seat share and frequency share, because the one thing these airlines do really well is have a business model where you stick to just one aircraft type with 180 or 210 seats, whatever it happens to be, and you just add more aircraft and you add more flights, and it works. And these, and it's really, I think, long-term legacy airlines for intra-European services, notwithstanding the need for those flights to serve their connecting markets and maybe a smaller corporate market, are going to find it increasingly difficult to survive. And that's why you see these hybrid airlines such as BA Gatwick, Vueling, whoever, Eurowings, whoever it happens to be, with Transavia, all of the major groupings in Europe now have a low-cost subsidiary, and that's where the growth is coming within their businesses, because that's where the market has gone. And once it's gone there, it's not going back. This is the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of Mandalorian, that, doesn't it?
It does really, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So obviously we talked about Ryanair and their significant capacity uplift, and you know, we're seeing that right across. Ryanair obviously up 36%, with 24%. Norwegian adding strong capacity growth as well. But actually, we're seeing the Chinese carriers, aren't we, Cheng, really start to add capacity back in this summer, and that's what we've been waiting for, isn't it? That's what we've been hoping we would start to see.
Yeah, data. I think the data makes sense for Chinese airlines. China is possibly a country which is the latest to emerging from the COVID crisis. So then a lot of airlines are actually starting to put in more capacity in the summer season. So we look at that, compare that, the summer from 27th March and 13th of March, you will see a big jump, particularly for those medium-sized airlines. Here you got Qingdao Airline, Chengdu Airline, Zhejiang Airline. They're sort of medium-sized, in the range of like 40 to 70 aircraft. Yeah, so those airlines, they're essentially now they're just adding lots of capacity, because previously, they started from a very low level.
And actually, quite a lot of these carriers had grounded fleets, didn't they, over COVID? So
I think this is interesting in the context of, we are now moving into this area of resources and availability. We've got airlines who are adding back 30% more capacity in 2 weeks' time, and therefore have to resource 30% more flight deck pilots and everything. And that I think is going to be really interesting. The airlines are going to have a good second half of March, or last week of March, first half of April, because Easter is 10th of April, or that weekend. So, you know, they're going to get off to a flying start, but this is where the resources are going to begin to come under a little bit of pressure, and we're going to see the first pinch points. Hopefully we'll get through them, but some of the news is alarming in terms of what people are doing.
It is, and you know, this one's a bit of a bit of an inflammatory headline, but I guess contextualized by seeing that the warning has come from a union. So there are other you know, there are other things at play there. I think what's really interesting is, I think everybody in the industry would accept that 2022 was a very challenging summer operationally, from both an airline and airport perspective. And some of that was about resources, some of that was about COVID was still circulating. Of course, it still is too. I think the hope is that there is more, you know, airlines and airports are approaching summer operations with a plan, with a resilient plan that says we know what we're going to be able to handle. And, you know, that capacity discipline that you talked about earlier, John, despite the significant increases we saw on the previous slide, there still is some capacity discipline there, which is being managed by yield, to try and not chase demand, you know, that can't be managed. I mean, that's the reality, isn't it? And these I think what maybe wasn't evident last year more broadly was that these resources are not quick fixes in some cases, particularly not on the pilot shortage front.
No.
But there are also challenges around getting the industry to a place where it's an attractive career choice for people, or it's an attractive place to work, you know, in terms of comparison to rates of pay, working conditions, starting hours, all of those things.
Yeah, it's, you know, we maybe as an industry we got complacent, pre-pandemic. Maybe we felt that people would work in it for any price because it was, quote, glamorous and attractive, and you know, some eggs have come home to roost. It's been difficult, and it will be difficult, but the implications of this ultimately are going to be increased cost for the traveller, because if American Airlines are suddenly, you know, offering a pilot on a long haul contract a salary of around $590,000 a year, which is a 25% increase on what they're getting at the moment, and Delta are paying 30% more for their pilots, well, I can reassure you that the cabin staff who are on the other side of that door are going to be asking for similar types of increases and changes to their working conditions, as will the people at the gates who are boarding the flights. And the airlines are going to have to pay those costs, and that means a pass through to the consumer. But not just from that, you know, as an industry, we're going to get hit with more and more taxation for carbon emissions and other cost items. The price of alternate sustainable fuels is 50% higher than it is for normal jet A1 kerosene. The industry's got a challenge in how's it going to manage its cost base, given all of these factors, the scarcity of supply of resources and also the scarcity of alternate fuel supplies, and legislators and government's obsession with taxation, with taxing aviation. And they see it as a really soft, easy target, and don't realise the impact that aviation has on an economy. And you know, there's probably no better example at the moment than in the Netherlands, where I just can't understand why the most successful airport in Europe, London's third airport, is suddenly being hit with capacity constraints by its government, when such a large proportion of the population and the economy relies on Schiphol for jobs, wealth creation, and you know, the position the country has in the world is built around Amsterdam Schiphol and how good it's been for 50 and 60 years. And now the Dutch government wants to try and destroy it. It's it appears madness to me, but you know, maybe I'm a mad person.
So you think the heady days of low cost travel are behind us?
I think the days of low fare travel are behind us. You know, I don't think you're going to get a €9 fare for a very long time, and maybe that's not a bad thing. Let's not forget that IATA's press day in December, they were calculating the profit per passenger carried this year by an airline would be $1 per passenger. You know, and when you think about how expensive it is to travel business class at the moment, particularly on a long haul flight, and what the profit margin must be there must be a lot of people in the world who are flying at loss-making fares still for airlines, and that's got to stop. So I think
it's a real conundrum, isn't it?
It is, and there's one thing we've not touched upon in any of this material, which I think is fascinating, is all of those vouchers that airlines have had and issued during the pandemic. Many of them have to expire or are scheduled to expire in the next couple of months. And what happens to that cash if it's not claimed and the voucher's not used? Is the consumer entitled to ask for a refund? Perhaps they took that voucher under the assumption that the airlines network would be the same as it was pre-pandemic, and it no longer is. And China would be a great example. You know, if you had a voucher because your flight to China was cancelled, well, if you're flying with many airlines, you couldn't get there now. Are you entitled to a cash refund? There's been a test case in the UK in the last couple of weeks, and the consumer won the case and had to receive their cash back from British Airways. That's a ticking time bomb as well that the whole industry needs to think about. What's going to happen to those vouchers? Because who's going to claim that money? The airline, or is the consumer going to take a legal case and be entitled to the refund? The regulator needs to decide those types of issues as well.
Interesting to see how that'll play out.
Yeah.
Cheng, are resources an issue for Chinese airlines and airports? I know that we didn't see the same degree of people losing their jobs or furlough schemes, but is this going to be a challenge for airports to ramp operations back up again in terms of having the right resources?
Yeah, not overall, not not so the challenge compared with the European, North American counterparts. The main reason, Deidre, as you pointed out, during COVID period, Chinese airlines, airports haven't really made any mass redundancies, so they have kept those workers. Yeah. And also, particularly for pilots, I think I haven't heard any pilot being made redundant in Chinese airlines. But the issue is some foreign pilots have returned to their home country. So some airlines are being hit hard by that. For example, China Spring Airlines. If I remember correctly, I think 20% of the pilots were foreign pilots before COVID. Yeah, 20%. I think that they returned to their home country. So now, because it's China had sort of like a shortage of pilots even before COVID. So airlines consider the pilots very important assets to the airlines. They just kept them, and
it's a good time to be looking for a new job if you're a pilot.
Absolutely, and
probably your oyster, isn't it?
You know, within the first year of the pandemic, lots of pilots who had a great expatriate lifestyle with Cathay Pacific left Hong Kong and have yet to return. You know, and they were top of global salary scales for pilots with great lifestyles. Cathay's going to have to pay to get pilots back, as is everyone else. It's it's a very good market if you're a pilot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I've got a couple more slides I'd like to talk about. One is a slight diversion. We can't not acknowledge what was big news right across the industry this week, although not a huge secret, but good to see this finally come to fruition. Riyadh Air, so Saudi Arabia, have confirmed a new national airline. And this, of course, is part of the National Aviation Strategy and the Vision 2030 that the country is is working to repivot the economy away from a reliance on oil production into a much more diversified nation. It's going to be a full service carrier, which we all sort of speculated was coming. They've placed a very big order. It's going to be based in Riyadh, not surprisingly, with the name Riyadh Air. And the aspiration is to connect Riyadh to over 100 destinations globally by 2030. No mean feat in 7 years. Yeah, lots of aspiration, lots of visionary stuff going on in Saudi in terms of developing facilities to reposition the country, as we said, as a draw. You think there's a chance, John, that they'll get to that 100 destination target by then?
Deirdre, you know, I don't know what to think about this. It just my logical mindset sort of says there is absolutely no need for this carrier. You know, there's a lot of disruption going to be created. There is no natural market for this. It is going to live and die on six freedom connecting flows between Europe and Southeast Asia, and maybe within the Middle East region and Indian subcontinent. And yet the other side of me says, you know, I completely understand the need to diversify as a country and an economy. But this is just only
ambition on a grand scale, isn't it?
It's either hugely ambitious and will be hugely successful. But you know, will it be as its own business profitable is another question. And you know, does Riyadh Air even care, given who its owner is? It's about the economic wealth that will be created and the diversification of the economy that they're hoping to achieve.
And I think that's the fascinating thing, isn't it? That actually what you have is a very joined up strategic view on how to get from A to B or A to Z. And this is one of the levers to doing that. I think what will be interesting.
This is Dubai V2. You know, this is what Dubai was 40, 50 years ago. But there isn't much sea, and well, there certainly isn't much sea around Riyadh. There's plenty of sand, you know, but it's the product and the supporting infrastructure, and not just the airport. I mean, you know, is there going to be a leisure product? What's that going to look like? How are they going to drive commercial activity? All of these sort of things are the question marks. And let's not forget, the first aircraft for this look like they're going to be delivered by 2025, at least from Boeing. And given that this ambition is for Vision 2030, 300 million people, that's another 19, 20 months from where we are now before they start to knock down the numbers towards that 300 million. It's a huge challenge. And that's before we think about what's going on in Jeddah and what will happen in NEOM and the competitive response that you will see in Doha and in Dubai, and to a lesser degree Abu Dhabi, and let's not forget about Istanbul. You know,
I think that's the interesting thing, isn't it? It's how the competitive dynamics in the region are going to pan out in that connecting hub market, competitive marketplace. I think we'll all watch with interest, won't we?
Yeah, we will.
Maybe one day soon we'll get to Riyadh to see what all the excitement is about. I'm very conscious of time. We've got a couple of minutes left. We've got a couple more slides just to run through very quickly. Cheng, you had wanted to talk about utilization of aircraft in China. Obviously, it has been low through COVID and through all of the disruption that's happened there. Interesting to see, you know, how's that gonna change as time goes by and recovery builds back.
Okay, yes, Deirdre, thanks. Yeah, okay, when you look at the aircraft utilization for wide bodies, at the moment it's just 5 hours. per day for Chinese Airlines, which is very low. Before COVID, it was around I think 10.5 hours. So at the moment it's just half. When you look at the narrow bodies before COVID, the utilization was around 9 to 10 hours a day. At the moment, it's just around 7 hours. The main reason for that was because the international market recovery for Chinese airlines has been very slow up to now. So and the Chinese airlines operate very large wide body fleets. So they can only deploy those wide bodies in the domestic market. So that on the one hand, they reduce the utilization for narrow bodies, and also the utilization which for those wide bodies are also very low. So that's the issue and the challenge faced by Chinese airlines.
Yeah, and actually, I think we see that, don't we, across looking at the performance by carriers. Again, we sort of see that evidenced really in how low-cost carriers are getting better utilization, as you would expect, because they're not operating wide body aircraft, are they?
Yes, exactly. When you look at the bottom three, Air China, China Eastern, China Southern, because they have a quite high proportion of wide bodies, particularly Air China. Before COVID, they had lots of international, particularly long-haul international routes. So that has become quite a big issue for them. And also those biggest three Chinese airlines, they lost a huge amount of money during the past 3 years. And China Spring Airline is a low-cost carrier. Its aircraft utilization is much better than the big three. And also you see a China West Air, which is also a low-cost carrier.
I just can't see how anyone, a large international airline with that sort of aircraft utilization can be making money. And clearly they're not. It must be a real worry for the airline management team how they're going to drive that utilization up.
That's right. And the only exception case here is the Xiamen Airline. Xiamen Airline, because the majority of its aircraft type is a 737. So it had got quite good utilization rate. It had some 787, but 787. Xiamen Airline, actually flew more international routes than Air China, China Southern, and China Eastern. So that has driven up the aircraft utilization for 787.
Yeah. And just finally, in closing, we're going just a couple of minutes over this morning. If you have to drop off, you will receive a recording of the webinar later today. But just very briefly, talking of the future and things that are going to happen. Your view, Cheng, is that high-speed rail is increasingly becoming a threat to domestic carriers in China, isn't it? As the network develops and new lines come on stream.
Yes, exactly. China has the longest high-speed rail network in the world. Actually, it's more than the rest of the world combined. So that has posed very serious challenges to airlines. When you look at the network map here, you see, I think actually all the economically prosperous cities are on the east coast of China, so they were connected by high-speed rail. So particularly for those routes under 3-hour flights. Okay, so if you travel with high-speed rail, they can possibly get there within 3 hours. They're very punctual, and also they're very fast. High-speed rail, very often they can achieve speed over 300 kilometers per hour. So many routes say, once you see high-speed rail, then the airlines had to dramatically reduce their frequency. Sometimes, terminate their services. So that's why Chinese,
I was just going to say, a real incentive then for Chinese airlines to shift to more international routes, or focus on really profitable domestic routes. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there will always be a market for air travel, won't there, domestically? We've seen that in other countries with high-speed rail networks. Japan is the kind of case in point there, but there's a price differential too, though, isn't there? Significantly cheaper to travel by high-speed rail in China than it is to travel by air.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the points, though, isn't it? In China, high-speed train services are very cheap by global standards. In Japan, there is little difference between a high-speed Shinkansen service and a flight. With the flight over that longer distance having the advantage. I was just struck when I saw this map about, if you were to superimpose that on the United States as a country market, the absence of rail in the United States is so stark, or certainly high-speed train service in the US, and seemingly will never be there. But it makes a huge difference to those aviation markets where high speed is being supported. You can see the impact on air services almost immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably a conversation for another day. Certainly because there's a sustainability angle as well, isn't there? In that switch to from air to rail that we're seeing in other markets, and a push in that direction. Thank you so much, both of you. Appreciate your time as ever. It was great to have you back, Cheng, and we'll watch with interest the developments and some of the things that we've been talking about this morning. The next webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, the 26th of April. We'll be back. John, you may or may not be joining us, depending on what part of the world you find yourself in there. So we'll keep you posted on that. In the meantime, you can there are some links that we've put in the chat as we've gone on, so you can read our latest views on industry developments and what's happening. But thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for your questions, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.